Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube art tutorial channel. I'm a professional artist working from my studio in Essex in the UK and painting plein air in the countryside. Well, there's the first half. We've created a lovely tonal version. Second half we'll be looking at producing the same scene using colour. So that should be fun. Okay, well, off we go on the second half. We have produced the tonal version. All we've got to do now is to produce a similar tone to that one, because as you can see, you know, it worked pretty well, pretty much got, I mean, my tones, I think I've got pretty much right. Not all of you will get them right, but that's the only way to really learn to paint. A good watercolour is to start off with the tones, you know. Then we look at colour. Okay, large brush again. Let's put that down so I'm not holding that. Right, sky. Well, we'll use the same process, but this time we'll just use a blue. And I've got winter blue and French ultramarine blue. You could use cadmium blue, you could use cobalt blue. You could even use Windsor blue if you want, but I'm going to use ultramarine, right? But you can use the Windsor blue, you can use any blue for the sky. It will just give you a slightly different feel. Now the first thing we're going to do, as before, we damp the paper. Right the way over the trees, down as far as the roof lines. And I normally find in the second half, or I find this, the paper dries a lot quicker, because being in a warm room all morning, it just dries quicker because it's warm, you see. And that's another thing when you use when you paint outside in the summer. You know, if it's a really hot day, then obviously you need to put more water on and to use more water within the colour mixes. Otherwise, they dry on the palette as you paint. So, yeah, right the way over the trees, down, only down as far as the roof lines of the building, all of the buildings. There you go. And we're going to do right the way down to the field up the end here, over the trees, over the distance, and even over the fencing, but no further than the field itself. So that's down to that. I'm painting at a bit of an angle, so obviously my effect will be slightly different to yours, because most of you are painting at a bit of less of an angle. Now, what I'm going to do here, unusual to what we've got white clouds, but if you've got the raw sienna, right? Raw sienna. That's a very yellow, dull yellow. Any dull yellow, and before it dries, I'm going to paint in the clouds. There we go. Now don't make that too strong. Right? Now, strong mix of ultramarine. You could use any of the blues, but a nice strong mix of ultramarine blue. French ultramarine is the one I use, which is normally the more expensive one, but it's not really worried. And I'm going to paint there again the tops of the clouds, there, and watch it bleed down. And I'm leaving some white touches above the yellow areas in places, and just forming the shape. There we go. And then I'm painting some touches in the lower area and combining that, just being a bit more elaborate than I did in the first instance. There we go. because I want that little bit of yellowy colour to come through in the sky. Then we paint in a lighter blue this side, and just finish at the lower part. Just want to give this the greens, the clouds, just that little bit of extra colour, because I'm all about colour here. Now, not tone, but we've got to introduce nice colour. Now that, to me, gives those clouds a glow, right? Now, if you're too strong with that, don't worry, but, you know, it really only needs to be fairly weak. And I've just laid it on, and then I'm allowing that to completely dry. So while that's drying, I'm going to use raw sienna again. Just clean that brush a little more. Raw sienna. A well-loaded brush. Remember the first washes we laid on were very light, and I'm sweeping across the landscape like that with that first wash of light yellowy colour. Okay, then as I come forward to that raw sienna, I'm adding cadmium yellow and a touch of the ultramarine, because I want that to go slightly green. So it's raw sienna to start with. Then to that raw sienna add cadmium yellow and some ultramarine. There we are. And if you notice, that's gradually turning green. Bit more cadmium, bit more ultramarine. The more ultramarine you add, the darker. But obviously if you add too much ultramarine, then it goes blue. There we go. And remember how we painted down? Now I'm going to go one tone darker with this in the foreground initially. And to get that darker, I'm using the Prussian blue. Oh yes, it's getting very, very complicated. Just keep with it. There we go. And see how that is a real strong green. And that will aid the feeling of light when we come to finish the painting with shadow work. And can you see how that pulls your eye towards the distance there? There you go. And then just leave it. Allow that to dry off in its own way. There we go. And if you notice, I've left some, I've pulled across the paper very quickly there, purely to get the feeling of a rough surface. But if you don't achieve that, it's not a problem. So to paint the trees, it's all about that tone value again. The colours I'm going to use, right, here we are. Here's a nice mix for a summer green that that really has a bit of strength, right? I'm going to use cadmium yellow. Cadmium yellow.
That's the bright one, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the one. That's the bright yellow. Windsor blue or Prussian blue. Right? Not too much of the blue, you'll find that is very powerful. Right? And I'm going to put a touch of the burnt sienna with that, just to make it slightly earthy. So those three colours I will be using throughout the tree in different strengths. So at the moment I'm using the lighter tone. Right, so let's remember how we went into the bulk of the tree and we went to the outside edges, opened the top up, we're producing an illusion of leafing and branches. We're not actually painting in every single leaf shape. And it spreads out. Remember how we worked halfway down before we started to add some darker stuff? Right? So we get to there. To make it dark, no more water, more blue, and more brown. That's what we're doing to create the darker green. And then we're going back into the tree on the right hand side, that's the shadow side, some parts in the centre, and on the undersides of some of the branches on the left. There we are. This is the way we're building up, exactly as we did with that tree there. And that principle, light, medium and dark, within your tree shape, will actually give you the result that I think creates that summer tree. Right, so we've got the light, we've got the medium. Now, more blue, more brown. Now this is dark, because I'm going in dark really early. There we go. While it's still damp. So it's a dense mix of paint. Not too much dark areas on the left, mainly on the right and in the centre of the tree. There's that top there. And in the lower part. Oh, there's a dark area in the centre there. I would like to have a dark area somewhere in the centre, because you will have branches that overhang. See how we're getting, the darker you go, the lighter the greens will show on the sunlit side. So I'm really going really dark now. The lower area, underneath some of the branches. And if you can hit it while it's still damp, then, well, you know, you've made it really. You've produced the pretty much what we're looking to achieve. And the outside edges, particularly on the right hand side, that's where the darker stuff is. See the way I've got the light, the medium, and then the dark tones. That way we've got form and shape. And also, I've come across the front of the tree in gradual tones from light, medium to dark, and that gives a rounded shape, but also shows branches that are in sunlight overhanging, and the shadows that they create on the branches underneath. Then you've got another area of sunlight, which is dark, then you've got an area of light, then you've got an area of dark, and another area of light, dark again, light again. They're not at equal intervals, but they are there because some of those branches will be in sunlight, some will be in shadow. And I'm just using the point of the brush just to shape up, just putting in one or two little touches around the top that needed hardening up. But anything else we'll leave till later on, because that will be when we really need to pull the finishing touches together. So that's the large tree. To produce the trunk, all you need, the burnt sienna with a touch of the Prussian blue or Windsor blue. The more burnt sienna you add, the browner it will become. And it will be a dark brown. So there's a dark brown. Right, if it's green, then you need more brown. If it's blue, you need more brown. Basically, you just need more brown. That's pretty much it, really. And nice and dark to start, and slope the trunk just like that. And the little trick again, stand it on the fields, right? And then the little trick is to take a damp brush while it's still wet and sweep it across the base and set that into, and use that brown as the start of the shadow colour. And that sits, if you wipe across the base of the tree with a damp brush, that will melt into the landscape rather than sitting on the land. It will sit into the land. Right, now we're going to look at the trees on the right and the little area behind the barn on the left. Right, trees on the right. Now this one is going to be dark, but it's not quite as dark. So I'm adding the same two colours, same three colours, but not too much brown this time. Although I haven't said that, I've got so much brown on the brush. It's oh well, we'll accept that as a green. Right, see what I mean? As a green, you know, I'm not saying a particular sort of green, but the tone of the green is important. So hopefully, if I can get this to, there we are, it's a bit more earthy green, this one. But I'm not worried about that. Main thing is that it's quite dark, because that's what I need on that outside edge running out of picture. And stroke across the paper, and as you come out, use the point of the brush to suggest. That's the word I'm looking for, suggest. You've got to suggest branches. There we are. And that's all you need to do. Pull them out like that, and I'm not putting too many different tones onto this. There we are, and that comes down to there. So that's the dark tree running out of picture on the right. If you notice, that one has got more brown in it, right? Which in some ways takes away from the brilliance of the green. But I wouldn't be too concerned if yours has come up more green. Main thing is that it's more or less one tone and fairly dark. That's all you want to worry about. So I've not put any light darks and or medium and really darks in there. I've just put one tone on. It's running out of picture. We're not really worried. Right, I'm going to clean the brush. Okay. Then I'm going to add more yellow to this, which is the cadmium yellow, to produce the lighter tree that's standing behind it. And this one, not a bad idea if you allow that to dry. If it's a little damper that merges, I wouldn't be too concerned. But either way, then you paint in the lighter tree that's standing behind that. If you don't go into that tree and leave a little bead of white here and there, then that should work. There we go. And that sits nicely underneath like that. See, I've got two different tones of tree there. One very light, one very dark. Had they be both dark, then there'd be one complete tree. So vary the trees. If you've got two trees standing next to each other, the one that's behind should be less intense in colour than the one in front. Then it sets it back. So generally a bit more blue in the mix, not as much as the bright yellow. That's general rule of thumb. Good, good. Right. Now we've just got to put this tree in the background that could be interpreted as a cloud if it happens to look that way. But whatever it is, it's got to be blue. Remember I said to you, anything in the distance blue as it comes forward, richer in tone. So I'm adding going back into ultramarine again, right? So we're knocking off that really strong blue with a little bit of yellow, but it's got to be a bluey green. And this will then sit back behind that rich green trim. And if you can, make it just a little bit light, well, considerably lighter if you can. Yeah, I think that's sufficient for that. Yeah, we've definitely got a difference between the foreground green and the green in the distance. Not only tonally, but a little bit more blue, so that will send it back. So we've done the roofing of all three buildings, one red, one brown, the other one off brown. Now I'm doing the frontage of the large building, painting around, and don't forget to leave jagged edges where it meets the grass, because that's where we've got grassy areas. Paint around the doors at this stage, actually going over the windows because they're only openings, they're not glazed at all. So, and notice how that's more grey than brown. That's because I've used more blue, perhaps a touch more red, but we're not too concerned if you don't quite get those tones right. Sorry, those colours right. The main thing is that you get the tone right. Notice how light mine is. And if you look at the tones on the tonal version, you will see that the roof is slightly darker than the sunlit side. Shadow side, we've got that to go in later. Now I'm going to paint the frontage and gable end of the little wooden building. And this one, I'm adding, bringing the changes completely. I'm adding burnt sienna to that mix. And that's going in on the gable end. So I'm using burnt sienna with a little ultramarine in, really, I suppose, ultimately. Like that. And then I'm doing the frontage. There again, trying to get a lighter tone of the roof itself, because that is exactly the way it was when we produced that successful tonal version. Burnt sienna with a touch of ultramarine. I've just run the chart. I've actually used a brown there instead of, but it's not vital. You could use any of those colours, as long as you've got a brown that's lighter than the roof areas. That's the key. And then more blue for the frontage of the building. It's there. And there we are. So that colour there for the building and that colour are very similar. Not too worried, don't have a cloud shadow coming over that anyway. Yeah? Okay. Before I go any further, I'm going to do the little hill in the background. I hadn't forgotten that, you know. Right, ultramarine, right, and a touch of something that's in my palette. I don't know what that is. A bit of everything. But anyway, ultramarine with a touch of brown, just to take off that, you know, touch of the burnt sienna, just a touch. But overall, it's got to be quite blue, because distant fields always appear quite blue. Now, that's not even blue enough. It's got to be blue and light. There we go. That, to me, sits back, and I'll tell you something. Let's go blue. I'm not getting the blue tone from that. There you go. That's what we're looking for. The blue colour for that distance there. Good. Now, while we have the ultramarine, we've now got to look at the openings, right? These are inside the barn. So, I'm going to use ultramarine blue with burnt sienna. And that should give us quite a dark burnt sienna, quite a dark colour. Not too much water, plenty of paint. Burnt sienna, could use any red really, and any blue, but that's what I'm using. So it's, and this is the door opening, which we paint across the top, down the left-hand side. Okay. Because the light is coming from the left. You remember? And I'm actually going to go a tone darker than that, because I want that to be really dark. And nice that there's plenty of blue in there, because blues will give depth to that opening, whereas anything brown or red will come forward. We want the opening to sit back. So all I've done is across the top, nice and wet, keep that nice and damp. Now I'm going to drag that, so I'm cleaning the brush, and all I'm going to do for this is to use a little ultramarine on its own and drag that colour and allow that to run down into that lighter area. But leave a grassy feel on the tops of the grass as you go into the barn. And really, that is pretty much as, you know, if you get a little run back there, so much the better. You know, because, there we go. Can you see the way that looks like an opening? It's not a glazed area, it's definitely an opening. Well, that's what I think it is anyway. Yeah. Same, we're going to do the same with the other one, but this time we're going to show something inside. So we're going very dark again, dark blue-brown colour. Across the top, down the left. And we're going to create some form of shape in there. The shape you put in there, I'm not really concerned about the shape it is really. Could be anything, as I say, anything that the viewer likes to think that's stacked in there really. And then I'm cleaning that, and just to give it a feeling that it could be, just could be hay or bales or whatever, I'm going to use the raw sienna, very weak, and just paint into that. But I'm not touching at this stage the other colour, otherwise it will run into that. So there's just a little bit of colour, but I've not joined them together this time, so there's a hard edge across the top. It just looks like something inside the opening that's in sunlight. So that's just to bring the changes, give two different varieties to that opening really. It's all about hitting the colour just at the right time, just before it dries, but not when it's too wet. If you can get that, then you know, if you've not been strong enough, no reason why when it dries you shouldn't be, you know, put in some darker stuff across the top and down the left. That can be done later on. And now I'm going to put in the windows. So these same two colours, burnt sienna ultramarine on the point of the brush, and I'm painting in one window there, one window there, one window there, and there. So that's your 4 windows gone in. Then there is an opening again, which is not going to be quite so dark, here. And to me, that is just going to be almost just one colour, because I don't want to give an illusion of depth into that. This is where I need the interest. So the crop markings have gone in, tapered and finishing well before we get to the barn. Just going to add a little more blue to that mix of burnt sienna and a bit more blue to the burnt sienna. And I'm now going to paint in the little bit of fencing that runs away. And it's by no means uniform. It's an old piece of fencing. It could be replaced at some point, but obviously the farmer has yet to get round to doing that. But that's what makes these paintings gives them age. So you could say it's make or break time, and I'm sure that. Why do I pick that up? I'm sure that once we get shadows in, then everything will begin to take shape. Because without shadows, it's almost as if the sun is directly on the front, right? So at the right angle where you can't see any shadow. But I'm creating a shadow from the left, running across. So the first place we did was the gable end. Right. Now, what shadow colour am I going to use? Well, I ought to know, really, didn't I? Do you know, I'm going to use ultramarine, right? So, ultramarine, that's in a part of the palette that's got a little bit of other colour in there, so, but never mind, that doesn't really matter. And I'm going to use alizarin crimson. Ooh. Now that's controversial, isn't it? Yes. Wonder why I'm using that. I've no idea. Now the mix is of a blue purple colour, not a red. Right? So if you're too much red, then knock it back with a bit of blue. And if you're too blue, you knock it back with a bit of red, basically. So ultramarine with alizarin crimson and a pretty strong mix. The reason why I've used those two colours, because you can get a lovely sort of shadow looking colour, but also with watercolour, unlike oils, I know you can glaze with oils, but we're glazing over colour that's already there. So if we put on the same tone, what we did underneath will shine through at whatever tone is underneath. And the colour of that will also shine through, right? So the main thing is we don't rub at the paper and loosen off the first wash, because those washes have got to stay on the paper while we paint the shadow. Right, let me just show you here. It's there. Now, that isn't dark enough, believe it or not. And so I'm mixing up a much stronger mix. Just shows you how much water this brush holds. Right, plenty of paint, very little water. There we are, let's try and mix that. There you go, look at that, that's lovely. Now that is the shadow side of that gable end, right to the point. And it comes down to the top of the roof. We're painting around that area, if you remember. If you look at, keep an eye on the tonal version. There we go, look at that. See how that brings that corner of that building into sunlight. And the jagged edge at the bottom, just to make us think that there are grasses standing up. I'm going to use the same colour for the gable end there. And this time it'll appear slightly different colour because we're onto a brown rather than a grey. Got an overhang there. Ooh, I've actually picked up a bit of the guttering that's coming out at the end. Look at that. That's a stroke of luck, isn't it? And immediately you get that sunlight lit effect. You know? Okay, now we have the overhang of the roof line. Now I'm going to make that nice and deep. Purely because my first brush stroke was too heavy and it's very deep, so I've got to continue that right the way along, which is not a problem at all, but there we go. And because that's going on to there, it's running across there. There we go. Look at that. Perfect. And just where it's overhanging, there. See the way you've got that effect at the side of that overhanging roof line is actually quite severe because the shadow is very deep. If it were to be just a line, you could almost be a gutter. So always make your overhang shadows deep enough to justify what it is. And we've got overhang shadow here from that building as well. There we go. There we are. And that has come up as a different tone to that. Luckily enough, seems to be working. Just take a little bit off the brush because I'm going to put in this one here now. Like that. That's a nice bit of, just a little weaker than that. Not really wanting that to be too strong, and I'm putting that into the area behind that tree there. Don't want that to be too dark. It's dark enough. Let's just lift a bit of that away. There we go. We don't want it too dark at that point, although there again we have shadow. There we go. So that's all going to be in shadow shortly, so we're not too concerned with that. Main thing is we hold a sharp line on that. Now the next area will be the actual shadow from the door that's open, and that runs like that and down like that. And that finishes with a slightly jagged edge again. Gives us the impression of the door being open and the shadow work against the building itself. And how dark you go with these shadows will depend in some ways on how much light you want to show, but also how dark you've been with your buildings. If you've been very dark with the buildings, you need to be really dark with the shadows. They will dry up a tone or two lighter, always the case. Right, now, the thickness of that door, of the side of the wall there, should, if you can, be slightly lighter than the depth in the building, the shadow in the building. If that's, yeah. So all of a sudden, we've got a feeling of the wall and then the thickness of that wall before you get into the opening. Another thing you can do if you're looking to, you can have, not too much on the brush for this, a little bit of shadow casting across that area there. Only half of it, because the other half is in brilliant sunlight. So it looks as if some of that is in a shadow from the wall, and yet the other half is in full sunlight because the sun is entering right the way into that opening. So I've actually toned that area, but left that area unpainted. Just a little something that can be done. Good. Now, bit of shadow work from that building running across. Some of you may not see too much of that. Oh, and also a little bit of shadowing from that that fencing. Now, it may be that I wouldn't, direct them just put a line across, because a broken line, but at least show a little bit of shadowing effect there. Now, while I have this shadow, why not build a little into your tree? So, I'm putting in some really dark touches on the undersides there, the underside there, the underside there. Some of you may not need to do this. A lot depends on how dark you've been, but mine, I think, would benefit from these little darker touches, just to indicate a feeling of the odd branch that's overhanging.
Still with that bluish sort of
Still colour. With the bluish sort of colour, because that green will show through. Going to go a little darker there, a little darker that side there. Don't overdo this, but for me, it's just give that extra dimension to that tree. It will dry lighter, so we're not too concerned if it looks very, very dark at the moment. And the trunk, underneath the branches and down the right hand side, will be where the real dark stuff is. Yeah, leaving the original trunk unpainted. So that may show up just a little bit of lighter tone on the left hand side against the shadow on the right. Now I'm losing a little bit of colour, so in other words this is going to be a lot lighter. Just putting some little darker shadows on the underside there. Just one or two little touches. Some of you may not need to do that, some of you may be nice and dark, you don't need that. Drying really, really quickly here. This afternoon, the class of uni here. I once took a group to, I took several groups to Spain, but it happened to be on June the 21st, which is probably, I think I'm right in saying, is the longest day, and potentially the hottest day. And we knew that once we got out and painted. So I had to find an olive grove, where the farmer come along in his tractor. I couldn't speak Spanish, well it was Catalan actually, because that was inland from Barcelona. But luckily, I've got a Catalan-speaking guide with me. And within moments, apparently, the farmer was quite happy, and we sat under there and painted very nicely. But that's the sort of thing that happens when you're out painting, you know. And that's what makes it exciting, you know. It can get you arrested, of course, according to, you know. And another thing recently I got told of for painting in Chelmsford city centre. Yes, yeah, I was confronted by a chappie. I do know who he is because I searched him online. Apparently, the High Street is council-owned, right? But if you come down Bond Street to where the new shops are, that's private. Oh. Right? Yeah. That is privately owned. Right? I did notice that, you know, they never have any of these people that lay around, you know, the homeless lay there. But apparently that's private. So to actually paint there, I need to ask permission. Right? So I just said fair enough, and I just packed up and went somewhere else, you know. So you never know, you see, what you're going to come up against when you're out. I just wondered whether he was having a joke to start, you know. Anyway, right, now, the door, supposing that door, I've not put it on here, but supposing that door is slightly recessed, that would have a shadow there. So that would create a recess, that door is sat back in the building. So, a little bit of shadow down there, let's add a bit more. Just add a bit more bump to that. So, yeah, apparently as private property. Well, I did say I haven't seen a sign up, and I also mentioned that I would have thought private property would mean it had a gate on it. But he didn't seem to, no, that didn't seem to go down too well, so I thought I'd best pack up and go home, you know. But anyway, I moved on. Right, okay. Now, the tree on the building. Now, this needs to be a tone or two lighter. If you remember, can you see where that is lighter than that? Right, now, the trunk runs, or the shadow runs from the trunk. Let's just add a bit more blue to that. I like it blue enough. Right, let's see whether this is dark enough. So that's the trunk, and the trunk goes up the building a little way. Then we have this lovely overhanging tree work that's just a clean wash on the outside, or on the inside, but on the outside it's jagged where the branches show overhanging. So that's all you've got to do, give an impression that there's branches overhanging. And how you put that on is entirely up to yourself, because to me, doesn't really matter what you do here, that will still look like overhanging branches from that tree. So you can't really go wrong there. But it is the famous last words, isn't it? But yeah, I think we can get away with that. Then, of course, we have the shadow from that gable end onto the small building. Yeah, so that runs across there, runs as far as you like to take it really, but I'm only going beyond the gable end because I think that's right. And this is slightly lighter in tone. I made it a similar tone there, but I prefer that slightly lighter after looking at it second time. And of course it runs down the wall like that. There we go. And that, once it dries, you'll see a good separation between the wooden building and the red tile building. Okay, I think we can say that's going quite well. Finishing touches to go in, but let's give ourselves a bit of drama in the foreground. Now, I'm going into an area of the palette that can be anywhere on your palette really, because I'm going to turn this green. So I'm using the cadmium yellow and the Windsor blue with a touch of the brown, cadmium yellow, Windsor blue or Prussian blue, that's the one you've got, and not too dark to start with, so that means plenty of water or enough water, because I'm going to do the shadow on the landscape, then I'll match that with the shadow on the building, because I'm not quite certain where the shadow on the landscape is going to come. Right, now if you remember, I said take another damp brush for spreading, so that's what I've done. I've loaded up that damp brush for spreading, and I'm going to have that lovely dark tone streaking across there like that. Then I'm going to just tease that across with a damp brush into that area, and all of a sudden we're creating sunlight, maybe from a row of trees. You know, I can make it up if I need to. Could be a row of trees out of the picture. And then it gets a little bit lighter before it goes dark again. There we go. So, and then I just blend that with a damp brush. Don't play at it, just blend it gently. In actual fact, I'm going to pull that in so it doesn't get. There we go. Look at that. Then I'm going this side with a slightly lighter tone. Notice how quickly I'm stroking this on. It's what they call make or break time. And we just hope it isn't the latter. There we are. And soften it, leaving some hard edges, some edges soft. And then just a little, as you run out of picture, this has got to be kept fairly light. Don't want that too dark. And just bring that across the front of that building. This is an area that will eventually give you that real sense of sunlight on the building. And without laying that in, and do you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to go really dark in this bottom right hand corner. Really dark. Is that a silly thing to do? Well, who knows? That's in there now. All I can say, if it doesn't work out here, then don't do it. And I think that sort of set. You've got to remember that will dry out considerably lighter. So although it looks very dark, I had my fingers crossed that it wouldn't dry out lighter. Good. Sunlight on that. Now, don't overwork these shadows. Leave them. Don't get rid of too much of the light area, because once the light area has gone, you've lost it. Right? That's the thing that where we sit on the edge with watercolour, because one brush stroke too many, and you've lost that sunlight. If you don't go strong enough, then you won't get the effect. But if you have one brush stroke too many across a light area, then you've done it. You've lost it. So allow it to dry, because I've done it many times. You can always look at it once it's completely dry and then go over again, creating a second layer. But don't put it on while it's still wet. Lay it in, let it dry, see what you've got. One last area, I'm going to clean the brush. Just going to put one or two finishing touches in a second, but I'm going to clean the brush, and I'm going in with a shadow area. So we're back to the blue ultramarine. This is for ultramarine and alizarin crimson, and this is just for that shadow that's coming down there that matches up with that shadow there. It's a cloud shadow, so I'm going to soften that in and pull that across like that. So it's a soft edge shadow. That just runs to there. Then we allow it to completely dry. Let that completely dry. Brilliant. Good. Now, once that completely dries, you'll find that it all blends together perfectly. But there are some finishing touches. And that will be done with the rigger. Not many, actually, you know, but there are just some little bits of lining. And I'm going to use ultramarine again with the alizarin crimson, but this time a very strong mix and a little bit more alizarin in there, so it's quite powerful. And I'm going to pick up the little bit underside of the gutter there, remember down the gable end, the overhanging tile work down the gable end, the overhanging tile work down that gable end, like that. May even be able to pick up the fencing again within the shadow if it's got lost, which mine has. Across the top of the openings, a little bit there, not too much really, you know, one or two little touches where the building meets the grass, because the grasses will have a little bit of shadow themselves. It all helps to add interest. Just allow that to dry that side. Once it dries, I'll put a little bit in there. And then we have in the sunlit areas a little bit of the lining, just gently putting in where not everywhere, but some of the boardwork or corrugation, whatever it is, within the building. And because it's an old building, those lines don't need to be straight. They can be, you know, quite uneven. And I'm putting one or two now in the roof area, just to give that effect of a little bit of tiling or a little bit of roof work. Just waiting for that side to dry before I finish there. And I'm just going to, before I'm finished, just going to enhance the crop markings within the shadow area again, just to give it, just so that it shines through again really. I'm using the rigger for that. You don't need to. I'm only putting it in the shadow areas. Don't want to highlight the sunlit areas too much, but just a little hint of bit of marking within the field. What they are, we don't know, and we don't really care, to be quite honest. You know, whatever they are. And then I'm just going to enhance, I think it's dry, but it's too late if it isn't, the area underneath that area there, and a little bit inside that door opening, just to give a bit of light to that. There we go. Good. Okay. Now, the final stage is taking it away to surround and then signing the picture. So, first thing you do, you peel away the tape. Notice I'm peeling away from the picture because many a time I've peeled into it and I've tore the edge, which if you're mounting doesn't really matter, but sometimes I leave this edge as an edge after mounting, which can add a bit of, you know, it's a bit more original really.
You didn't do the birds.
The birds. Someone likes the birds and the birds will go in. Right you are. We have demand for birds before we sign up, and that's fine. Right, the birds need to go in this dark colour again. Nice sort of bluey, purpley sort of colour. And where do we put them? Well, we've already put them in before. So let's put one here, similar place I think. We put a bird in there. And this one is bigger because I want that to be close. Then I'm going to have two more. One there, which is a little smaller, and another one there. Two slightly different angles. And as I was saying, always sign your work. Because one day, in 150 years' time, you never know. So I'm signing mine up here. All being well, this will be on my YouTube channel in a few weeks. When I do get it up, I will forward the link to Bernard, just to make certain that he can then forward that through to you. But there you have it, from tone to colour. And my name is Colinsteedart, and I thank you all very much for attending.